want you to turn to your neighbor and say,
stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
I'm not my father's son. I'm not him.
Not trying to patronize a little bit. Baby, I empathize, I must get.
Waking up alone in a room that still reminds me my heart has got to learn.
But before you go,
It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, and welcome to the show. It's the first night of Hanukkah, and the solstice is coming this week, which means the Persian celebration of Yalda. So love to all of you who celebrate both of those holidays. It's a time of reflection, and my guest tonight has been reflecting on his life quite publicly in recent years. Billy Porter has won an Emmy, a Grammy, and a Tony, so he's just an Oscar shy of that rare group of artists with all 4 awards. But that recognition has come only after decades of work as an actor and a singer, and a life that has had its struggles. He reflects on that journey and the particularity of it as a Black, queer, HIV-positive man in his memoir, Unprotected. It is now out in paperback, and I recently got to talk with him about the book, about how art saved him, and about his engagement in this perilous political moment in our history. Billy Porter, thank you so much for this time. It is just a pleasure and an honor
Thank you.
to spend some time with
you.
you. I want to start where you start your memoir.
Okay.
Because you open it with the closing lines of Tony Kushner's epic show, Angels in America. And those lines strike me to my core every single time. This, we won't die secret deaths anymore. The world spins forward. And, of course, I immediately think of your role on Pose as the character Pray Tell. And you kind of, to me, right, like you portray an angel in America now over, looking out for queer kids of color. But, I mean, for you, why begin the book with that idea, this idea of Kushner's angel sending us off to the great work of life?
Well, what's interesting to me is that I didn't know that I was missing something in the business and in my work, right? We talk about representation today. We have language for it. We didn't really have a language. Like, it was 1994, I'm Black, I'm queer, I'm in this business, I'm used for my talent in these spaces, but I'm not allowed to really be a human being. I'm used as a clown, essentially. And there doesn't seem to be much movement for me in these spaces. This is pre-Hamilton. This is pre-Cynthia Erivo and The Color Purple. When you sang like a Black person and didn't sound like Mandy Patinkin, Patti LuPone, or Bernadette Peters, you were a Black entertainer without a soul. You were there to be used to stop shows and to entertain. But when it came down to telling real stories about real human beings, there was no space for us in that. There was no space for Black people in general. And not to even say about a Black queer man. So Angels in America, I took myself to see part 1, Millennium Approaches. And it was the first time that I saw a representation of my Black, queer, educated, grounded, three-dimensional human self on anything. I had never seen it before at all. And it wasn't until I was seeing it that I realized I had never seen it. And Jeffrey Wright was extraordinary in the role.
Breathtaking.
And I knew in that moment that if I was ever going to make it in this business, and by make it, I mean like convince the world that I'm an actor, it would be through the role of the leads. It was like, I just, I knew that I was gonna have to stand at an intersection that didn't exist. I was gonna have to represent a community that didn't exist yet. So that when the time came, I would be ready. And that's exactly what happened. I saw that show, I looked at the market, and I was like, oh, they're casting straight boys in these roles. It's okay for now, but not always.
Yeah.
Right? Because as the Black gay man, y'all need to give me that role.
It's so funny that you put it, or interesting to me that you put it that way around, like, literally hadn't seen yourself. I mean, when I came out, I'd say to people when they ask, oh, did you always know? I was like, sure, but I literally had no point of reference. I had not seen myself. And people couldn't understand what I meant when I said that, at least at the time. Like, I literally had never seen myself.
Yeah, and I've talked about this too. I was around the corner. Well, actually, the back of the theaters butted against each other, and I was in Grease, the revival of Grease with Rosie O'Donnell and Megan Mullally and all of that. And I was playing the teen angel, and they had me in like 14 inches of orange rubber hair, and I say prancing around like a little Richard Automaton on crack. And, it was just not, I was miserable. And I didn't understand, because it was like, oh, the dream is, I'm like in a Broadway show, and I'm a principal, and I'm creating a role, and I'm miserable. And seeing Angels in America gave me clarity. And it was the first time too, where like, you saw a Black queer man, educated, the heart of the show, the center of sanity, with all these white people swirling around him during the AIDS crisis. And Tony was dealing with the issues that, many communities weren't talking about. He was speaking for his Jewish community and the white community and the Black community and women. And like, it was just so much at the same time. And it changed everything for me. Yeah. And then what happened is Pray Tell became my own personal sort of 3-season Angels in America journey.
Pray Tell was his character in the TV series Pose, which is about a chosen family of queer youth in New York's ball scene at the height of the AIDS epidemic. He won an Emmy for the role in 2019 and was nominated for 2 more in the following years. The character, Pray Tell, spends part of the series concealing the fact that he's HIV positive from that chosen family. And in 2021, Billy Porter disclosed that he, too, had been living with HIV for years and had sought to keep it quiet. Pray Tell was HIV positive and went through a journey of revealing that to his community. You had lived with HIV for 14 years and kept it to yourself, and have now told the world about that. And I actually wonder about, because you've become sort of such a symbol of laying down the burden and claiming our joy. And I wonder what it's like now to be on the other side of that. Now, it's been some time since you made that public declaration through this role. What's it like to be on the other side of that?
It's such a wonderful question because, as an artist, as a human, as a Black man, as, whatever, like it's when you live in a space of lack for your entire life, when abundance shows up, it's still work to understand how to receive that. And I'm sort of in the middle space of that. I'm in the space of sort of trying to let go of waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time.
Wow.
And choosing joy, choosing it. It's a choice. I have to wake up every morning and recommit to choosing joy. Sometimes I'm really successful. Sometimes I'm not successful at all. Some days I'm not successful at all. You know, during the election, I was not successful for several days in a row, leading up to it and after it. Like, I was just not successful at joy. You know, it's really difficult right now, particularly. We're all sort of living inside of a collective trauma and chaos that we're trying to move through, and we have to sort of feel simultaneously. And, you know, I'm learning how to do both of those things at the same time. It's like, you have to feel it, you have to be in it, and being inside of what's happening is what then allows for us to move through it. And I don't know that everybody understands that part of the journey. I am just learning how to understand that part of the journey. You know, embracing the truth is what gets us to peace, what gets us to joy. It is effort. It takes effort. It's work. It is work, is what I'm finding for myself, at least. I'll just talk about myself.
I'm talking with actor Billy Porter about his memoir, Unprotected, which is now out in paperback. Coming up, we'll talk about how he's done a lot of that work of healing and finding joy through his art. And we'll get the backstory on that tuxedo dress that broke the internet during the Oscars in 2019. So stay with us.
Notes from America is supported by the Innocence Project, working to free innocent people from prison, prevent wrongful convictions, and create fair, compassionate, and equitable systems of justice for everyone. More at innocenceproject.org.
It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, and I'm talking this week to Billy Porter about his memoir, Unprotected, which is now out in paperback. It's a revealing portrait in which he talks about really hard stuff from his childhood as a queer Black boy. He finished writing it during the early COVID shutdown, and he says that gave him space to really dig into himself.
You know, COVID helped me find the form in which to tell the story.
What do you mean?
Well, I didn't want it to simply just be a cradle to grave narrative. You know, I love books, I love writers. And so my standards for myself was very high. It was debilitating me for a bit. And then when I was able to just sit during COVID and quiet my mind and just be present, I was able to just settle into what I was feeling. And what I was feeling was, you know, a parallel disruption of my nervous system that I felt during the AIDS crisis. And so then I was able to align those two things and write from toggling between how the past, you know, living in that space in the 80s and 90s, how that really affected me and my generation, and then toggle back and forth to how this one was making all of us feel as well, and trying to marry those worlds together to find a space for healing.
You write about your mother in very powerful terms in this book. She's been a part of your public conversation. So can you tell us a little bit about her, and really starting with her birth and the way that shaped her life? Because that's become such an important part of your own story too.
Yeah, my grandmother was ready to have her. There was no doctor around. They gave her this medication they used to give to like babies that weren't developing well, to sort of hold them back for a little bit so that they could grow inside the womb a little bit better. And they gave that to my grandmother to hold the baby for a while. And then the doctor came and sort of forced my mother out, which kind of pinched some sort of nerve and created this disability with her that, you know, to this day at 76 years old has never been named. You know, it presents like cerebral palsy, but it's not cerebral palsy. But she's in a nursing home and she has no mobility, and it's degenerative, and it's, you know, it's been her entire life, just sort of degenerative starting from the time she was born. So, you know, I watched her fight a system that, you know, she was born in the 40s, so any disability was aligned with retardation. And nothing was wrong with her mind. Nothing has ever been wrong with her mind. But she was treated as if something was wrong with her mind back then. So she was just sort of put out of the consciousness of civilization. And she was determined to have a different life. And she did. And she, you know, got up every morning, got up every day, and lived whatever life, showed up for whatever life was in front of her. And that is something to me to see every day of my life that has, you know, she is my hero. If anybody ever asks me, it's like, she's my hero, because even today, you know, the fight we had with the nursing home was that they weren't getting her out of bed early enough in the morning. You know, she was like, get me out of this bed, get me washed, get me dressed. And if I have to be here, I'm not going to stay in bed all day. Like, that was the fight that we were having. So she's a lifer. Whatever the life is, she has shown up for it. And she's taught me and my sister to do the same.
You write, though, also about, it's been complicated, about the ways that she tried to protect you as a child, but that didn't quite come out right. Not always the ways that that you needed to be protected.
Yeah, I mean, you know, she was sheltered, and the shelter was religion, and religion was Christianity, and Christianity was our colonizers' religion. And one of the things that came with the colonization was the stripping of our ancestry, which is the condemnation of the two-spirit, AKA the queer. You know, every indigenous culture, including the African indigenous cultures, have the two-spirit, which in modern days, you know, in our time would be considered the queer people. We have a direct connection to spirit because we are aligned with the male and the female. Inside of us, we're connected to all of it. And that's why we have a direct connection to spirit, and we're the one that were charged to protect the villages and to historically protect the tribes. And so my mother didn't really, you know, our people don't really remember that. That's on purpose. I'm here to remind everybody that I'm not nothing new, and we're actually a gift.
Gifts are not always well received. To some, that gift is a threat. To others, that gift is something to prey upon. And Billy Porter shares in his memoir the ways in which he was sexually abused as a child, including by his stepfather. I asked him whether writing the book was a way to begin reckoning with that trauma.
I've been reckoning with it for years. As a matter of fact, I went into trauma therapy during COVID, and, we really teased apart in a different kind of way this sexual trauma. And as she began to understand me and my work, she really began to understand that I've been using my art to try to heal my trauma for my whole life, but not even understand. She said you were doing it unmonitored. You were just doing it instinctively because you understood somehow that dealing with it from a creative angle would be healing for you. And I have, and everything I've done for a really long time. It's not the first time. This book is not the first time. It's just another time that I've inspected and taken it out and tried to sort of ask why and what the point of it was and how to heal from it and set myself free. Is that possible? I'm still in the evolution of that. But I think one of the things about early severe trauma is it doesn't ever really go away, but you learn how to manage it better.
It seems like in that way, your art has indeed been part of what changed the trajectory of your life. I mean, is that how you see it? I mean,
it is.
Do you think art would have found you one way or the other, or that it's part of what you needed in order to have your life?
I think it's what I needed in order for me to have my life. I don't know that I would have survived any of this without it. And I know that for certain. I had something to wake up to and for every day that made me happy, that made me focused, that made me feel like I was being of service and contributing to the world in some way.
In 2019, on the red carpet at the Oscars, Billy Porter had one of those viral moments in our culture. One in which he indeed contributed to the world with his gift of queerness. And also truly established his place as a fashion icon. If you somehow haven't seen the tuxedo dress, do go look it up. And there is a story behind it.
I'm a big believer in speaking life into yourself, and words have power. And when I was in college, I was teasing. We would have Oscar parties and I would tease that, like, I'm going to wear a gown to the Oscars. I'm sick of the same penguin suit. This doesn't make any sense. The women get to have all the fun. I was saying that in like the late 80s. And so when the surprise of being summoned to the Oscars to host the red carpet for ABC, I was surprised, and immediately I was reminded of what I had said all those years prior. And I was like, I'm gonna have to do that.
Yes.
And I was at a Christian Siriano fashion show, and I thought, oh my goodness, what if it looks like a tux close, right? If the shot is really close and it looks like a tux, and then when you pull back, it's a full-on antebellum ball gown replete with like hoop skirt and everything. I said that would be a full gag. And I talked to Christian at the party. We only had like 11 days or 12 days or something. And he agreed, and he snatched that up in like 9 days. He made that in like 9 days. And I knew that it would make a splash. I didn't realize that it would change. Yeah. There was a life that I had, I say BOAO, before Oscar, after Oscar. Like, it is completely different after Oscars. Like, my life is different.
In what way? What do you mean by, say more about that?
it cracked open a space that I knew in my heart existed, but I didn't know that it was so big, and I didn't know that it was so, like, it cracked open the world to me.
So ironic through the claiming of that two-spiritedness and that queerness that you had to wrestle with. Through claiming it cracked open the whole world.
Right. I say it all the time. It's like everybody told me my queerness would be my liability, and it was for 2 decades plus. And I'm so grateful that I lived long enough to see the transition where my queerness is my superpower.
The other thing I want to ask you about that moment is, while there, you spoke with the late Congressman John Lewis. And I want to ask you the same question you asked him, because it comes up a lot on our show from folks, which is, for those of us who are feeling fatigue politically, and who are, as you put it earlier in this conversation, struggle some mornings to say, okay, I'm ready. What encourages the forward momentum and engagement? How do we find it?
Well, first of all, we have to figure out how to take care of ourselves. The self-care component is everything, because when you take care of yourself, then you can recharge. We have to refill our wells. The second thing is, like he said, we can never give up. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. That's what Frederick Douglass said over 250 years ago. The conversation that we're having and the messaging has to change. I know at 53, our messaging is a change is going to come. Sam Cooke, and in that there is an implication that we arrive somewhere and the work is finished. We arrive. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, marriage equality. We got a Black president, Roe v. Wade. We arrived somewhere and the work is finished. A change is going to come. Well, the change came and the change went. Because we didn't understand that the work continues. Yes, we fight for something specific. And then once we get that specific thing, we continue to fight to make sure it doesn't get reversed. If we know that going in, then we take care of ourselves in a different way, and we will not ever be fatigued again.
You've got an album coming out next year, and as I understand it, the album will speak to this sort of political and social moment that you're talking about now, and that's, am I right about that?
Well, it has everything. It's a pop album. I wrote a lot with the late, great Andrea Martin. M&EK from London. I wrote a lot with Justin Tranter. He's an executive producer on it. And, for me, it is like, I'm so proud of the work. It speaks to my time in this business. It speaks to what I feel about the world. It speaks to the journey of love and what that truly means, and healing. And, there's a lot of flexing on it. Because I've come out on the other side of something that on paper I wasn't supposed to. It wasn't supposed to look like this for me.
Right.
So history is written by the winners, and I win. And so there's a joy in it. There's a flex in it that that makes me sort of chuckle, because I've never really been that guy. So it leans into that. And musically, it is everything I've ever wanted to do and say and put out in the market, in the mainstream music market. So I'm thrilled, excited. There's a new single out right now I just put out right before the election called Stranger Things. Go get it. I sang it at Global Citizen. You can see the performance on YouTube. It's called Stranger Things. I'm so proud of the work. There's some stuff that's highly political on there. But it's not the whole album.
Gotcha.
But it's, it's everything. It's all of my dimensions.
It's so interesting, too, that because you write in the memoir about pop being weaponized against you, and now you, I guess you already really were a pop star, but with this album, you become explicitly, kind of pop star.
Yes, I'm trying. We'll see.
Is there anything in that, just that, this sort of relationship with the genre, that at one point it was?
Well, yeah. I mean, like I said, one of the lyrics is history's written by the winners, then I win. Yeah. Y'all put me out in the 90s. She's back.
Thank goodness for it. Thank goodness for it.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, you mentioned earlier you're 53 years old and, the world has exploded for you midway through your life. I just wonder how that does or doesn't shape your priorities as an artist.
Well, first I have to say I'm grateful that it happened now and not earlier, because I know who I am and I know what I'm here for. I'm ready for this. And there's a service component to this intersection that I stand inside of, these intersections that I stand inside of. And it's my goal to make sure that I show up properly and I stand in the service that I'm here for. And how great it is when your work is your service. My work is my service. It really fills me up. It really, really does.
Well, Billy Porter, thank you so much for this time and for your work and its impact on me personally. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the story of a global music star, a Black woman who dominated the market almost 100 years ago. Stay with us. It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, and I've got a musical holiday gift for you.
Behold that star. Behold that star up yonder.
You're listening to trailblazing singer Marian Anderson. Last year, Sony Classical released a commemorative book about Anderson and her legacy, including 15 compact discs. Yes, that's those little round, shiny things that came between cassettes and MP3s. Anyway, the collection represents the entire catalog of Marian Anderson's RCA Victor recordings. 42 years of music from one of the most consequential artists of the 20th century, who is maybe starting to fade from our collective memory. The collection prompted us to reflect on Anderson's life story when it came out, and this holiday season, it feels like a nice moment to revisit that segment. So, let's learn something about Marian Anderson and her music. I called up one of the great voices of American radio, Terrance McKnight, the evening host of WQXR here in New York City, who is working on a book about Black artists and the classical stage. And he had a lot to say about Miss Anderson. Terrance, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So if people know one big factoid about Marian Anderson, it's that she held this famous controversial concert at the Lincoln Memorial in 1939. So remind us of that story. What happened and why was it important historically?
In 1939, Marian Anderson sang on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 75,000 people came out to hear her sing. It was a radio broadcast. She started by singing, "My country, 'tis of thee."
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, who thee we see.
And it really shook the country, because for someone who at this point in her career was in her 40s, someone who had sung with the New York Philharmonic, someone who had given a debut at Town Hall, someone who had toured throughout Europe and was considered the busiest singer in America, Asia, and Europe in the 1930s. And she sang at Lincoln Memorial on 39 because she had been refused a concert in Washington, D.C. Howard University was trying to bring her. And the Daughters of the American Revolution denied her Constitution Hall. As a result, the president's wife got involved. Eleanor Roosevelt got involved. She was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. So she resigned as a result of them discriminating against this Black singer who had conquered
World-renowned.
3 continents. You know, she sang to thousands in Lewiston Stadium in New York in 1925. So almost 15 years later, she's being discriminated against just because of her skin tone. And that was a big deal. One of the listeners that day to that 1939 concert was a 10-year-old Martin King Jr. And he entered an essay contest at school. And he talked about Marian Anderson. And, you know, he said, she sang as never before with tears in her eyes. When the words of America rang out over that great gathering, there was a hush on the sea of uplifted faces, black and white, and a new baptism of liberty, equality, and fraternity. King went on to say, but Miss Anderson may not as yet spend the night in any good hotel in America. So she inspired a young Martin King, and she inspired a generation and generations of singers. Man, I think about Sing Sade a few years ago.
Yeah.
It was more than a few. And I just remember she barely moved, yet she commanded the attention of the audience. Just pure elegance. And when you look at Marian Anderson, that's what you get on stage and off stage. Just pure dignity, elegance. And when she opens her mouth to sing, it's all there, man. And I think that's why she was able to just capture the attention of so many people for so many decades.
And she left the United States fairly early in her career, right? I mean, she'd gone to Europe in the 20s, I gather in part because she had to escape segregation here in order to be a performer.
Well, she got an opportunity. You know, after high school, she wanted to go to music school in Philadelphia, but was denied. They said they didn't accept coloreds. And she got the scholarship from NAM, National Association of Negro Musicians, who provided her with funding, as did her church, Union Baptist Church in Philadelphia, to study privately. So she got a private teacher, and her talent was just phenomenal. And word got out. And then she went off to Europe, man. She was singing so much. I think there was a 6-month period where she sang 120 concerts.
Wow.
And
was that typical back then? I mean, was that the kind of work that people did, or was she just like an over-the-top worker?
I think she just loved to sing. And there was the opportunity now. And the other thing to remember is that when she was born in 1897, and through the first few decades of her career, the most potent type of American entertainment was minstrelsy. So that's what she was up against. She was the antithesis to how minstrelsy portrayed Black folks. And so I'd imagine there was a shock as she stood up there and she was able to sing in French and in German and Italian and in English, for that matter.
Yeah.
Marian Anderson was able to accomplish all of this in the 20s and 30s. And then, you know, certainly we can move up to the 50s, because up to this point, there weren't Black singers singing at the Metropolitan Opera. And so that was still another barrier that had to be torn down, and she did it.
In 1955, she becomes the first Black singer at the Met, correct?
That's correct. Interestingly enough, she sang The Masked Ball. It's a Verdi opera, in which Verdi had asked for this character. She played the character of Ulrica, which was a witch. And Verdi had asked that this person be of color. And so typically that role was sung by someone in blackface. They didn't have to do it that night.
Yeah. Wow.
Della vil sua frettati precipita penetra.
And I think will say that I believe she was the highest paid singer on stage that night.
Okay, you get it, Marian. Tell us more about the music itself and her contribution to the sort of American music itself. She started with gospel.
Well, I'm going to say, let's call it spirituals, because as
Okay.
she was growing up, gospel music hadn't really happened. It didn't happen until the late 1920s and 30s. So Marian grew up singing those spirituals, that authentic, American music that informed jazz, that informed so much of our vernacular music now. That's what she grew up to, and that's what she was so famous for singing. You can't think about He's Got the Whole World in His Hands without going back to Marian Anderson. She really made that tune sing.
The whole world in his hands, he's got the big round world. In his hands, he's got the wide world. In his hands, he's got the whole world in his hands.
Well, man, anytime young musicians who grow up in church, that church audience is tough. If you've ever had to say an Easter speech or some kind of speech in front of a church congregation, I grew up in a Baptist church, so I know those folks, they know real when they see it and when they hear
Yes,
it.
indeed.
They want to get you right. So Marian Anderson grew up sort of going to two churches. Her mom was Methodist, her father was Baptist, but her father's sister was a singer, and she was going to the Baptist church, so her pops would take her to hear her aunt sing. And, by the time she was 10 years old, she joined a chorus in Philadelphia. And then I believe she gave her first solo in church at 11 years old. So if you can stand up in front of the church folks, you learn how to do the job. And oftentimes it was said about Miss Anderson's performances that they seemed so intimate, as if she was singing in a salon or a parlor. And I think that had something to do with that small church upbringing.
And in classical and operatic music, what was it about her musical style, her singing style that was unique, or that we need to know to understand her?
For one, it was her range. I mean, she was a contralto, so she could sing very deep and with a lot of husk.
Lord, how
But she could also sing, very bright and high.
tell me no.
And so she had just this wide range, but also, if I could explain it, I could do it. And I can't. You just know it when you hear it. I've spent the last couple of days just listening to her just go from Handel to spirituals to Bach to music for the holidays. And it's very special. There were folks who said she had the voice of a generation, or the voice that you hear in a century. And it's true.
Is there a particular song in the classical and operatic tradition that you think, dear listener, if you're going to go out and be introduced to Marian Anderson and her range today, go download this?
If you've ever felt that someone didn't like you, listen to her sing, "He Was Despised."
He was despised.
Comes from Handel's Messiah, and she'll make you feel a little better. She'll make you feel okay about folks not really caring for you in that moment.
And rejected.
She really captures what Handel was trying to get across in that music.
Rejected of men.
You get the sense that it's personal. And that's the thing about her. No matter what she was singing, she made it seem so personal, like she had lived that experience.
Do you remember discovering her or when she first sort of touched you?
It's hard to remember, but one thing that I found touching is something I learned about her recently. And, she started her, that big concert you were talking about, 1939, that was Easter Sunday. Well, she gave her last recital as a singer Easter Sunday, 1965. But she didn't leave the stage. She continued to narrate. She did Lincoln portrait by Aaron Copland. And she continued to advocate for justice and integration and equality. Her nephew, James DePriest, became an important conductor in Oregon, in Portland. But he was also heavily involved in New York. He was assistant conductor with the New York Philharmonic, and then he was a conductor with the Symphony of the New World, the first integrated professional orchestra in the country. That was in the 60s. Well, Marian would go on stage with that orchestra and, just show up. And she would, try to raise money for that orchestra, raising money for the cause of integration. Mm-hmm. And one of the musicians, he was telling me the other day, he said, I remember James DePriest conducting Symphony of the New World. And after the concert, he said, okay, we're going to go to my auntie's house. He said, so he didn't think much about it. And they got on a train, went uptown, came to this apartment. And he said, there was a woman walking around serving tea with an apron on. And when he turned around, it was Marian Anderson. And he said, but she was just so elegant, and she served us tea. And so this thing about her humility, it just wasn't on stage. It was something that she carried with her, seemingly, in her personal life.
I have to say, before I let you go, you're working on a book about not only Marian Anderson, but about Black folks and classical music in general. You want to give us a tease and when it's coming?
I'm off to a good start. Finishing is something I'll have to ask you about on the sidelines. But yeah, I think, the relationship that Black artists have to classical music is an untold story. So it's not a historical look at Blacks in classical music. It's more taking interviews of folks that I've come across over the years, many of whom are in their 90s and 80s, who were there at that point of integration, who were there also when you had Negro orchestras. So hopefully I'll expose some things that folks hadn't thought about. And my purpose, man, is to find a way forward that's more inclusive. So when we go to the concert hall, we see all of our culture up there together and not this hierarchy of culture, and certainly not just Black composers or Black artists in February or March, but something that's more reflective of, what America can be.
Thank you so much for this time, Terrance.
Kai, thanks so much for having me talk about what I love talking about.
All right. Terrance McKnight hosts the evening show on WQXR here in New York City. That's our sister station. You can catch his show every weeknight at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Behold that star.
Notes from America is a production of WNYC Studios. You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts and join us on Instagram at Notes with Kai. And listen, if you didn't catch the show last week, we did this awesome thing where we invited listeners to call in and live curate a Notes from America holiday playlist. So if you're looking for music to get you through the next few weeks, do check it out. You can go to our website and click on any of the recent episodes to find a link to the playlist, or you can just search for it on Spotify. And one more piece of exciting news. Next month, for the Martin Luther King Day holiday, we are going to record our show live from the stage of the famous Apollo Theater here in Harlem. This is part of an annual event produced by WNYC and the Apollo to honor MLK Day. And for the first hour of it, I'll be hosting conversations inspired by the song Young, Gifted, and Black. The event is Sunday, January 15th. Tickets are free. You just have to RSVP to get them. They'll be available starting in the new year on January 2nd. You can get all the details at wnyc.org/MLK2023. Jared Paul does the music and mixing for our show. Editing, producing, and reporting courtesy of Karen Froman, Vanessa Handy, Regina DeHeer, Rahima Nassa, Kusha Navadar, and Lindsay Foster Thomas. I am Kai Wright. Thanks for spending time with us tonight, and happy holidays.